In a recent analysis I did of television advertisements for cars, I noticed something strange. Drivers were usually shown as high status males, and I noticed that as a rule they wore a button-up shirt with no tie. One ad showed the driver using the car, enjoying all its wonderful features, parking in the CEO spot, going up to this luxury office. So far so according to the pattern. But there was a catch. This was not the actual boss. It was a subordinate who had taken the car out to be washed and was playing at being boss. He was an imposter. And guess what he wore? He wore a tie. Our appearance can speak in the most fascinating, subtle ways. But it doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it shouts. What word would you say I Googled to get these image results? It's easy, isn't it? I Googled doctor. Now we know that doctors don't all go around looking like that, but this is the kind of cultural image that we have of the concept doctor in our minds. So what does this all have to do with cycling? Well, especially in the past decade, the Irish government has put a good bit of effort into trying to encourage cycling uptake. Now, if you look at the core message behind all of these efforts, it comes down to a request. Please ride a bicycle. But especially my recent work has shown me that what we're really asking is this. Please be a cyclist. And that begs the question, what is it we're asking people to become? The most prolific publisher of images of cyclists in Ireland is the Road Safety Authority, and this is what their representation of the ideal cyclist is. It is someone who wears a helmet, high vis, and clothing that is, more often than not, suitable for sport. The thing is just, the most commonly identified barrier to cycling uptake, both here in Ireland and elsewhere, is fear. People are scared they'll get hurt if they go out and ride a bicycle. But there's more to it than that. There's also a psychological or sociological dimension to this fear. It's scary to go out and work your body in full public view. And people are worried about how they'll be perceived. And this is not frivolous fears. So I wanted to know whether the representation of cyclists in RSA multimedia actually reinforces this fear barrier to cycling uptake. So I conducted a card sorting exercise. I had 2 sets of cards showing 5 different modes of transport, and they were identical in every way except for the cyclist. In card set A, she wore clothing consistent with the RSA's recommendations and their representation of cyclists. Helmet, high vis, and clothing that would also be suitable for sport. In card set B, she just wore ordinary everyday clothing. The first question I asked my respondents was to arrange the cards in order from the least safe to the most safe. Now, I knew from my literature review that in Ireland people think cycling is terribly dangerous, but I was quite shocked at the strength of the sentiment in my respondents. One said that if he could put the cycling card an arm's length further to the least safe side from the rest of the cards, he would do so, and he's a cycling commuter himself. When you break the results down then per card set, in other words, which representation of cycling did the respondent see, you can see a clear negative effect on perception of safety when people see cyclists represented the way the RSA does. And I just for short, I'll call it safety gear from here on. This effect is persistent no matter how you slice the data. The effect on perception of safety was stronger among male than female respondents. I broke my results into 2 age groups, under and over 30. The negative effect on perception of safety when the cyclist is seen in safety gear was stronger, among the over 30s than the under 30s. Next, I wanted to see whether the representation of cyclists in safety gear, such as is shown in RSA Multimedia, negatively affects perceptions of social acceptability. So I asked my respondents, imagine it's you in the photo. Somebody managed to photograph you using each of these modes of transport, and now they're going to show one of those images to all your friends. Arrange the cards in order from the one you'd most want to be chosen to the one you'd least want to be chosen. In other words, on one side, put the card that if that one is picked and it shows you using this mode of transport, you wouldn't mind so much. On the other end, put the card that if that was chosen, showing you using that mode of transport, you might even be a bit embarrassed. Again, the overall result shouldn't surprise us considering existing studies on perceptions of cycling. Again, the negative effect on perception of cycling when you show the cyclist in safety gear, such as the RSA does, it's very clear. If we look at the other end of the scale of the way that people arrange the cards, this effect is again very clear and it is consistent. The negative impact on perception of social acceptability of cycling was much bigger among female respondents than among male respondents, although the negative effect was still visible. There was an interesting result overall when you looked at the age groups. It is clear that people under 30 in Ireland have a much more negative perception of cycling than those over 30. There are interesting questions that arise from this. Again, when you split the results by card set, you see a noticeable negative impact on perceptions of the social acceptability of cycling when people see the cyclist represented in safety gear, such as the RSA Multimedia does. This effect was massive in the under 30 age group. In the over 30 age group, it was still there, but not quite as pronounced. Overall, this study shows that the representation of cyclists in RSA Multimedia has a negative impact on perceptions of safety and perceptions of social acceptability. So, am I criticizing the RSA? This is a more difficult question to answer than one would think, because if you look at the mandate of the RSA, their mission, they have a very narrow focus. They are literally just looking at on the road, and their goal is to reduce collisions, deaths, and injuries. The results of the study primarily speak to a bit of a wider view. Cycling is not some kind of magic bullet that will fix all our problems, but I think, especially non-researchers, it's just so hard to communicate to people just how far, deep, and wide the positive impact of increased cycling uptake can be. So I'll try. The exercise inherent in commuting by bicycle can help so much with sedentary lifestyle diseases. And the thing is that if you don't have to tack on exercise as just another job on your to-do list every day, if it's just part of getting from A to B, you're more likely to get that exercise. In Ireland, children and teenagers are almost 100% reliant on their parents to get from A to B. They spend their lives as passive passengers with no control over where they go. Lack of control, or a sense of a lack of control of your life, is a factor in depression. And I have to ask myself, how much of a positive impact can it have on the mental health of our youngsters if they could cycle to where they want to go? If they had that bit more of control over their lives and over their movement. Our house is in the town center, and I sometimes sit in my study listening to people screaming and hooting at each other outside. driving is incredibly stressful. And in this way, encouraging cycling uptake, driving in such a way that you make it possible for people to cycle and feel safe doing it, actually benefits you as a driver, because it reduces congestion and consequently reduces the stress that you experience when you're behind the wheel. Transport is not the biggest contributor to air pollution in Ireland, but it is certainly one of the big ones. And cycling is without a doubt a much cleaner way to get from A to B than driving. There is one implication of the findings of the study which actually does directly concern road safety and not just the wider societal well-being and public health issue. And that is that when you discourage cycling uptake, and representing cycling the way that the RSA does discourages cycling uptake, when you do that, you reduce the number of cyclists on the road and you lose what is called the safety in numbers effect. It has been shown that the more cyclists there are, the safer cycling becomes. As long as this is the image we push of the ideal cyclist in Ireland, what we are doing to cycling advocacy is the equivalent of taking a flat road and turning it into a massive uphill. We're asking people to do something that goes against their most basic sense of self-preservation. There's another thing. In 2017, there was an inquest into a cyclist fatality. I read 4 different newspaper articles reporting on the inquest, not the original report. All 4 of these articles mentioned that the driver saw the cyclist. There's no doubt about it that there were details such as his head movements and direction of travel. Yet all 4 newspaper articles also found it necessary to mention that the cyclist wasn't wearing high vis. If the driver saw the cyclist, what does this have to do with anything? The driver overtook the cyclist, and in the process a collision occurred and the cyclist tragically lost his life. The inquest found, or they recommended in the end, that all cyclists should wear helmets. Where are the questions about the role of the infrastructure that both those road users were forced to negotiate? If those questions were asked, they were certainly not considered important enough to report on. Where are the questions about the culture of road behavior on our roads that makes it socially acceptable, a social norm, to overtake cyclists in a certain way with certain overtaking distances, all of which would have affected the driver's behavior in that incident? Where are those questions? If they were asked again, certainly not considered important enough to report on. What's happening here is that we're looking at the question of cyclist safety, slapping a high vis and helmet on it and calling it case closed. And the case is not closed. A helmet may have saved the cyclist's life in that collision, but what would have definitely saved his life is if the collision never took place in the first place. And that is more likely to happen if you are in a segregated cycle lane than if you're wearing a helmet. Like all academic studies, this one had some limitations. My sample size was only 73 respondents. However, each response was recorded face-to-face and required considerable investment from my respondents, so the results are really quite robust. I also did not have the resources to travel all over the country to collect results, although I did take steps to make sure that I gathered data in places where people tended to come from far and wide, and I know from chats with my respondents that I had quite a variety of locations. It would be interesting, however, if we could repeat the study with a larger sample size and with responses gathered from a wider variety of locations. You can see the full paper, including all references, on researchgate.net, and I will also link to it on social media and my website. It includes 5 in-depth interviews that I also did. This was my honours thesis for Communications and Creative Multimedia, which I completed at the Dundalk Institute of Technology. I am now a postgraduate researcher at Technical University Dublin under the supervision of Dr. Caroline O'Sullivan and Dr. Lorraine Darcy. Thank you for your time.